It all started with a box no bigger than a loaf of bread, cardboard cracked at the edges, corners softened by time, and the faint smell of cedar, dust, and something older still, maybe memory itself. It had sat untouched for over 5 decades, pushed to the back of the attic behind yellowed newspapers, rusted tackle boxes, and brittle maps of counties that no longer existed by those names. And yet that morning, with a soft wind brushing against the attic's gable vents and a strange heaviness in his chest, Elden Harper had felt drawn to it, as if something inside had been waiting not for years, but for him. There was a photograph inside, black and white, folded once down the middle. 2 boys stood in a field of bluebonnets, the younger one squinting at the camera with a grin that barely masked the mischief behind it. Behind them, a windmill leaned slightly westward, and a shape, almost a shadow, hung near the horizon. Elden recognized the smile instantly. It belonged to his brother, Samuel. He hadn't seen Samuel since 1968, the year the boy disappeared on a July morning, leaving behind a baseball mitt, a half-written letter to their cousin in El Paso, and a silence that no amount of searching or grief ever filled. The sheriff had theories, as did the neighbors, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. Just a few boot tracks near the Blanco River and a broken watch found weeks later beneath a cottonwood. Elden sat down slowly on the edge of the attic boards, the wood groaning beneath his weight, the picture trembling slightly in his hand. Behind it, tucked into the creased corner of the photo, was something even stranger, a ticket stub, worn and half-faded, from a passenger bus line that hadn't operated since 1971. The words Sabinal Trail Line were barely legible, but beneath them, in Samuel's handwriting, was scrawled, "For the Lost Maples. October. Bring the blue tin." The words meant nothing. And yet, to Elden, they struck with the quiet force of a long-forgotten bell. The Lost Maples. A real place, a nature preserve in the hill country, known for its rare pocket of Uvalde big-tooth maples that turned fire-red each fall, a blaze of color in a state that rarely saw seasons. They'd gone there once, maybe twice, when the boys were young and their father still strong enough to hoist them both on his shoulders. But the blue tin? Elden frowned. There had been dozens of them, for nails, coins, tobacco, even old ammunition, but none tied to Samuel or to that day. He didn't know what made him reach for the cedar closet that evening or pull down the old coffee tin from the back of the shelf. He didn't expect it to rattle when he shook it. And he certainly didn't expect to find, inside, a small roll of film, undeveloped, still sealed, and a note: "If anything happens, follow the map. Start where the red tree bends east." That night, Elden barely slept. The image of the note gnawed at him like a quiet echo. What had Samuel been planning? Who was he meeting? Why a film roll, and why hide it? By sunrise, the sky outside his window had begun to bleed with the soft orange of early summer. He sat at the kitchen table with the map spread before him, trying to recall every trail, bend, and grove of the Lost Maples Preserve. Most of it was gone from memory, smudged by the years and grief and the slow erosion of age. But one thing he did remember, clearer than anything else, was that tree, the one his brother had climbed and shouted from, the one that bent east like it was bowing toward the sun. It had stood near the edge of a canyon trail, not far from the Sabinal River. He looked out toward the road now, where his old Ford truck sat half swallowed in shade, its tires dusty but whole. A soft shuffle moved near his feet, and there she was, his silent companion of the past 9 years, Gracie, a border collie with more silver than black in her fur, and eyes that watched everything without judgment. She pawed once at the base of the screen door and let out a low, patient whine, as if to say, "Well, are we going?" Elden stood, joints creaking like old porch boards, heart heavier than it had been in years. He didn't know what he expected to find out there, among the red maples and the layered rocks and the breeze that carried the scent of mesquite and old stories. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But he knew he couldn't ignore it, not now, not after that note. He packed a light bag, water, the tin, a worn notebook, and a change of clothes. He tucked the film into a sock inside his boot, not out of necessity, but out of habit, like he had when younger and carried something worth keeping. And as the truck rumbled to life beneath the slowly warming sky, he glanced once at the house in the rearview mirror, the house that had held its secrets quietly all these years. The road ahead was dust and memory, winding westward towards Sabinal, through towns that had shrunk with time and left behind more ghosts than people. As the sun rose behind him and the landscape rolled into scrub hills and limestone valleys, Elden felt something stir, not fear, not quite hope either. Just the slow awakening of something unresolved. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it sends you a whisper folded in an old photograph, wrapped in the scent of cedar and ink and years gone by, and asks if you're ready to listen. The road narrowed the farther west Elden drove, until the painted lines gave up altogether and the only guide was the pull of memory and the occasional mile marker half buried in dry grass. Gracie lay curled on the passenger seat, her ears twitching with every change in engine tone, her head lifting now and then when the wind brought new smells, cedar, sagebrush, the distant smoke of a fire unseen. By the time they reached the outskirts of Sabinal, the sun had started to tilt downward, painting long shadows across the ranch fences and abandoned mailboxes. Sabinal wasn't what it used to be, though. In truth, Elden wasn't sure it ever had been more than a rest stop between places people actually meant to visit. The gas station was boarded up, its old Gulf sign swinging aimlessly in the breeze, and the only cafe in town had a handwritten sign in the window, closed for repairs. Back soon, maybe. That maybe carried more truth than most things Elden had seen that week. He pulled over by the old Sabinal Trail Line Depot, a squat stone building with a rounded tin roof and faded red trim. The sign still hung above the door, barely, its letters chipped, and the paint worn by time and weather. The lot was empty except for a rusted pickup parked sideways beneath a live oak, and a scattering of crushed soda cans glinting in the dirt like bent stars. Gracie jumped out first, nose to the ground, tail raised slightly. Elden followed, slower, feeling the weight of his own breath as he stepped toward the depot door. He half expected it to be locked, most forgotten places are. But it creaked open with the soft complaint of a hinge that hadn't been oiled since Nixon's first term. Inside, the air was still and cool, shaded by thick limestone walls. Dust hung in the light like ash. A row of benches lined one wall, and behind the cracked counter, a wall of faded schedules remained pinned in place, untouched by modern time. Elden took a step forward, the floorboards whispering beneath his boots. "You lost," came a voice from the back, low, gravelly, not unfriendly, but not quite warm either. A shape emerged from the far shadows, a man, white-haired but not frail, in overalls and a flannel shirt, with hands like old rope and eyes that seemed too sharp for someone his age. "No," Elden said after a beat. "Just circling back." The man tilted his head. "Ain't had a visitor in months. Not since the kids came snooping for ghost stories. You don't look like that type." "I'm looking for something," Elden said, reaching into his jacket and carefully unfolding the bus ticket stub. "Do you remember this line running up to the Lost Maples area?" The man's eyes narrowed, and he took the stub gently, holding it like a piece of brittle history. "Well, I'll be. Sabinal Trail Line. That was my daddy's route. Ran one bus, twice a week, up to Vanderpool and back. Closed down in '71, after the flood took out part of the canyon pass." Elden nodded. "My brother wrote something on the back. October. Bring the blue tin. Does that mean anything to you?" The man looked up slowly, as if weighing the cost of remembering. Then he gestured to a chair. "Sit down. You want the full picture. It don't come quick." Elden sat, and Gracie curled at his feet, tail flicking slightly against the floor. The man walked to a rusted filing cabinet in the corner, yanked it open, and pulled out a hand-drawn map, yellowed at the edges, routes traced in red pencil, some crossed out, others circled. "This here," he said, pointing to a place west of the official trails, was called Switchback Hollow. "Not on the public routes. My daddy used to drop a few folks off there in the fall. Hunters mostly. But once or twice, we had kids. Young boys. One of them looked about your age then. Might have been your brother." Elden felt a chill gather at the base of his neck. "What were they doing up there?" The man shook his head. "Didn't say. But I remember one of 'em, the quiet one, he asked about the old rock arch, up near Red Bluff. Said he had something to leave there." Elden's breath caught. "The red tree, where it bends east. Could that be the same place?" "Could be," the man said. "There's a tree like that. Locals call it the Witness. Grows out over the bluff, twisted like it's seen too much. Most folks don't go near it. Not since that boy disappeared back in the late '60s. There it was, unspoken all these years. The boy. Not a boy. His brother." Elden stood slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the map. "Can you show me how to get there?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "It's not an easy trail. Washed out in parts. But you follow the old fire road past the second cattle gate, then keep east until the ground softens and the trees start to thin. You'll know the place. There's a silence to it, like the earth holding its breath." Elden folded the map carefully, as though it might vanish if creased the wrong way. He shook the man's hand, the grip firm and steady. "Thank you." As he stepped back into the fading afternoon light, Gracie at his side, he looked toward the distant hills, layered in dusty gold, the maples not yet turned, but waiting. Everything about the landscape seemed expectant, like an orchestra before the first note. Something was out there. Something left behind, buried maybe, but not forgotten. And as Elden started the truck once more, heart thudding with a strange, quiet urgency, he knew this wasn't just a journey into nature. It was a walk back into the hollow of time, and if he listened closely enough, the land might just speak. The trail began not with a sign or a marker, but with a memory, the kind that lives behind the ribs and only rises when called. Elden parked his truck just beyond the second cattle gate, where the old fire road forked into dust and promise, then loaded his pack and stepped out into the cool hush of late morning. Gracie walked ahead, cautious but steady, her ears rotating like satellite dishes, scanning for things only dogs could sense, the past, perhaps, her fear dressed as scent. The first stretch was gentle, a slow incline through dry cedar stands and limestone shelves that had crumbled under the weight of wind and years. Grasshoppers rattled in the brush, and the air carried the faint sweetness of wild persimmon mixed with the iron tang of sun-baked rock. Elden took his time, each step deliberate, each breath measured, the kind of rhythm one learns when walking through places that remember more than they reveal. An hour in, the trail began to dissolve. What had once been a clear wagon path was now a patchwork of erosion and guesswork. Fallen limbs blocked the way, and animal tracks crisscrossed what little remained of human passage. Elden paused at a fork in the underbrush where the sun flickered like old film between the branches. He looked down at the map again, its edges curling from heat, the red pencil line trembling under his thumb. That tree should be east of here, he muttered, more to Gracie than to himself. Just past the bluff. She tilted her head, then darted left, nose down, tail rigid. Trust the dog, he thought. She doesn't second-guess what she knows. They pressed forward, away from anything that resembled a trail, through switchgrass and elbow-high thickets that clawed at his jeans and left dust streaks on his hands. The land sloped upward, sharper now, the rocks underfoot slick with lichen. Birds fell silent. Even the wind softened, as if uncertain whether it should disturb what lay ahead. And then they saw it. The tree wasn't red now, not in the heat of summer, but it was unmistakable. Bent eastward, bark twisted like old rope, roots clutching at the edge of the canyon as though holding the world together by sheer stubbornness. Its trunk was broad, split down one side by lightning long past, and hollow at the base. A tree that had watched the seasons come and go like trains it no longer bothered to count. Gracie stopped short and let out a low, almost reverent whine. Elden followed her gaze and stepped closer. The earth near the tree's base had been disturbed, not recently, but not centuries ago either. The roots arched around a hollow, and inside, barely visible beneath a crust of soil and pine needles, was something metal. Blue. He knelt slowly, knees aching, and brushed the dirt aside with a trembling hand. It was a small tin box, the same kind kids once kept marbles in, or treasure, or secrets. Faded and rusted along the edges, but still intact. On the lid, scratched into the paint with something sharp, were the initials, S.H. Samuel Harper. Elden sat back on his heels, throat thick, heart hammering like it wanted to break free. Gracie edged closer, placing her head gently on his knee, her eyes wide and calm. He opened the box with a slow exhale. Inside was a photograph, yellowed and curling. 3 boys, not 2. Samuel in the middle, younger than Elden remembered, with that same sly grin and a hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a kid Elden didn't recognize, dark-haired, wary, with eyes that didn't smile even though his mouth tried. The third boy stood apart, arms crossed, looking straight into the camera like he knew something no one else did. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, was the arch of stone that locals called the Witness's Gate, a natural formation just beyond the canyon edge, shaped by wind and time into the outline of a doorway. Beneath the photo, folded into quarters and stained with age, was a page torn from a notebook. The handwriting was Samuel's. October 14th, 1968. If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. His name is Roy Candler. He said not to tell, but I don't think I can carry it anymore. We left something at the gate. I hope it stays hidden. Elden read the note twice, then a third time. Roy Candler. The name lit a faint match in the back of his memory, not a friend, not quite family. A neighbor? A boy from school? Someone on the edge of things. He couldn't be sure. But Samuel had been afraid. That much was clear. And he hadn't just run away. Elden sat there beneath the tree for a long while, listening to the quiet hum of wind over stone, the distant buzz of summer heat. He thought of all the years spent blaming himself, The questions that had hollowed out holidays, the silence that settled between him and their father after Samuel vanished, a silence thick enough to bury whole lifetimes in. Now, for the first time, the silence had shape. A boy's fear. A name. A place. The witness's gate. Gracie stood and moved to the canyon's edge, nose lifted, tail wagging low and slow. Elden followed her to the lip of the bluff. Below, the canyon yawned wide, layered with eons of rock and dry riverbed, a monument to everything time forgets. And there, just beyond the ridge on the far side, half hidden by brush, stood the stone arch, just as in the photo. Crumbling but still whole. Still waiting. Elden felt something in his chest shift. Not a release exactly, not yet, but a loosening. As if the years had finally turned, just a little, to let him pass. The day was waning, and the sky blushed faintly toward orange. He would camp nearby tonight. In the morning, he'd make his way to the gate. He didn't know what he'd find there, or who might still be watching, but something had been left behind, and the land, at last, was ready to give it back. The canyon welcomed him not with grandeur, but with a kind of tired quiet, like a place too old for vanity, yet still proud enough to stand. The path down was steep and narrow, gouged by rain and time, forcing Elden to brace against the slope with each step, knees grinding like old gears. Gracie led the way without hesitation, weaving between thorn bushes and rocks with the sure-footedness of someone who didn't need a map to know where she was going. They reached the bottom by late afternoon, the light already thinning beneath the canyon walls, soft and amber like the last warmth of an old blanket. The air down here was cooler, carrying the faint scent of limestone dust, juniper, and something darker, the quiet, heavy smell of things that don't move anymore. The kind of air that held its breath. Elden walked slowly along the dry riverbed, his boots crunching on pebbles bleached smooth by years of forgotten floods. About 100 yards from the base of the bluff, tucked beneath a low outcrop of rock, he saw what he was hoping for, an old hunter shelter, half collapsed but still standing on one side. The roof, once canvas, now just tatters, sagged between two limestone boulders. Inside, dry ground. Enough space for a fire. Enough shelter to make it through the night. He stepped in and sat slowly, back against stone, the silence wrapping around him like a thick coat. Gracie curled beside him, close but not touching, as if sensing that he needed space, but not solitude. He built a small fire from dead mesquite and cedar, the smoke drifting upward into the open night. No wind, no insects. Only the distant crack of a bird's wings echoing once against the canyon walls, then gone. He ate little, some jerky, a biscuit left over from breakfast, water that tasted of metal and old canteens. Hunger had left him sometime that morning. In its place, something else had taken root, an old tension, rising from the bottom of his spine and settling behind his eyes. When night finally draped the canyon, it came all at once, a velvet curtain pulled tight across the sky. Stars blinked into view, shy at first, then bold. The fire hissed softly as it burned low. And then a sound, not loud, not threatening, just out of place. A soft crunch. Then another. Like footfalls, not far. Not near either. Not animal. Not sure. Like someone who had learned to walk quietly but forgotten why. Gracie stiffened but didn't growl, her eyes locked on the dark beyond the firelight. Ears pulled forward so sharply it looked like they might snap. Elden reached for the flashlight in his pack but didn't turn it on. Instead, he waited. The sound came again. A single step. Then stillness. Then, a voice. Whispered. Half-broken. Almost like breath. Sam. The name cracked something open inside him. He stood too quickly, the pain in his knee a distant thing now, eclipsed by the pounding in his ears. The fire flickered, casting shifting shadows against the shelter walls, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw a figure at the edge of the trees. Small. Thin. Wearing something too old for today. He stepped forward. Who's there? Silence. Not the kind that holds peace, the kind that waits to see what you'll do next. Gracie didn't move. Didn't bark. She only watched. Elden took another step. The night seemed to push back. No more sounds. No more shapes. Only the whisper of wind finding its voice again in the canyon above. He stood there a while, until the cold started to find its way through the denim, until the fire was no more than a circle of embers. Then he returned to the shelter, slowly, his back prickling with memory. Lying down, he didn't sleep. Not exactly. He drifted. Between waking and the edge of dreams. Between childhood and now. In that in-between place, he saw them again. Samuel, crouched near the arch, hands wrapped around something wrapped in cloth. The other boy, the one with the hard stare, pacing, anxious. And someone else behind them both. Older. Not a boy. He woke before dawn with the dream still lodged in his chest like a stone. By the first light, he packed his things and moved toward the bluff. Gracie walked ahead, silent and certain. There were answers at the witness's gate. He could feel them now, not as threats, but as truths, patient and half-buried, like bones in soft earth. The canyon had given him a glimpse. Not enough. Not yet. But the shape of the past was rising, grain by grain. And sometimes, the dead don't speak, they wait to be heard. The morning light climbed slowly down the canyon walls like it wasn't sure it belonged there. Soft beams slipping between the cedar boughs, brushing the ground with a pale gold that made the dust shimmer like it held secrets. Elden moved carefully along the rocky slope, following Gracie's lead as she threaded between boulders and mesquite. His legs ached from the night on hard ground, and his back reminded him, with every step, that 78 was not 70. But he didn't stop. The stone arch, the witness's gate, as locals once called it, came into view just before noon. It stood like a relic of another world, a natural formation carved by time, rain, and wind, shaped into the perfect, impossible arc. Its sides were rough but symmetrical, reaching out like open arms that had waited far too long to hold someone. From a distance, it looked like the entrance to something sacred, or the final marker of something forgotten. Elden stood before it in silence. There was no plaque, no name carved into the rock, no human claim laid upon it. And yet he felt the weight of generations pressing down through the stone, not just geologic time, but memory, soaked into the very texture of the bluff. Gracie circled slowly, nose low, tail neither high nor tucked, alert, curious. She paused near a patch of overgrown grass and scratched twice at the dirt, then stepped back. Elden moved to where she stood. The ground there sloped slightly downward into a shallow hollow, partly hidden by wild grass and scree. At first, it looked like nothing, just erosion, the way time wears away at Earth when no one's watching. But then he saw them. Stones, stacked in a loose formation. Not natural. Not quite a cairn either. Almost like a boy's attempt at marking something without fully knowing how. He knelt slowly, brushing the grass aside. His fingers trembled as they touched the stones. Some were smooth and round, others jagged, all placed with purpose. He lifted them one by one, careful not to disturb too much, until he hit cloth. It was oilskin, stained dark by age and moisture, but intact, wrapped tightly, tied with string. The knot had swollen with the years and nearly fused to itself, but Elden worked it loose. Inside was another tin box. This one larger than the last, battered but sealed. When he opened it, the smell of old metal, dirt, and memory hit him first, dry and bitter, like something meant to stay closed. There were 3 things inside. A second roll of undeveloped film, a folded page torn from a school composition book, and a pocket knife, the kind with bone handle and a small nameplate inlaid on the side. Art Candler. Elden held the knife in his hand for a long moment. It was heavier than it looked, and warm now from his grip. The initials hit him like a bell that had been ringing all along, Roy Candler. The name Samuel had written in warning. He set the knife aside and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, his brother's, scrawled in blue ink, uneven and pressed too hard into the page. October 14th, 1968. If they find this, I'm sorry. I didn't know what he was planning. I thought we were just going to the arch to leave the knife, to make it right. But Roy said it had to be bigger. Said people had to pay attention. He brought the gasoline. I thought he was just talking tough. I thought it was a joke. But when the fire started, the sentence trailed off. Beneath it, another line, shakier, like it had been written in haste or fear. He said he'd tell the sheriff I lit it. He said nobody would believe me. I'm going to hide the film. If someone finds this, please don't let him be the hero. He isn't. Elden sat back hard, breath catching. A fire. Gasoline. A setup. It came back in pieces, headlines from years ago, neighbors whispering. A fire had burned through part of the canyon that year. No homes lost, no injuries. Just a stretch of land charred black and silent for months after. But the sheriff had arrested no one. No charges. It had been called an accident sparked by lightning. But it wasn't. Roy Candler, if that's who he really was, had used Samuel as a shield. And when it all went wrong, Samuel had vanished. Run or been silenced. Elden didn't know yet. But he had tried, even as a boy, to leave the truth behind. The film. Elden turned the small canister over in his hands. Whatever it held, whatever Samuel had captured, might be the last piece of the puzzle. If he could get it developed. If time hadn't erased it already. Gracie moved beside him, gently nudging his arm with her nose, as if reminding him that the living world still waited. He looked out over the canyon from the base of the arch. The land stretched in every direction, wide and indifferent. But here, in this small circle of earth, something sacred had survived. A memory, a warning, a truth no one had ever wanted to see. And now it was in his hands. Elden stood slowly, knees stiff, eyes clear. He didn't know what he'd do with the film just yet. But he knew what he had to do next, find out what had become of Roy Candler. Some shadows didn't stay buried, especially when the dead had left behind their stories in ink, stone, and blood. The road back to town felt longer than before, even though it traced the same path through the hills and scrub, past the same leaning windmills and silent barns. Maybe it was the weight of the box now resting in Elden's pack, or the growing throb in his knee that pulsed with each turn of the truck's tires. But more likely, it was the knowledge that the story he'd told himself all these years, the story about his brother disappearing into the wilderness, a tragic accident, a boy lost to time, had always been incomplete. And now it was beginning to fill in. Sabinal was no busier than when he'd left it, but the light had changed. Clouds were gathering from the west, thick and low like a ceiling about to collapse, and the wind carried the dry bite of an approaching storm. Elden parked near the old post office, left Gracie curled up in the shade with the window cracked, and stepped into the library across the street, a small brick building that smelled of paper, mildew, and a century of dust. The librarian, a thin woman in her 80s with a voice like dry leaves, barely looked up when he entered. She waved him toward the back where the archives were kept, a set of metal drawers filled with yellowing issues of the Sabinal Chronicle, bound in brittle volumes like forgotten scripture. He searched the fall of 1968, flipping carefully through the brittle pages until the headline jumped out at him like a punch. Mysterious brush fire contained near-lost maples, lightning blamed for spark. Beneath it, a photo, not of the fire, but of the group who helped contain it. 3 men, one a sheriff in a wide-brimmed hat, another a local landowner, and between them, a boy no older than 15. Smiling, arms crossed, chin high, Roy Candler. The caption praised his quick thinking, saying he'd run 2 miles to the nearest road to alert authorities. Local youth hailed as hero in brush fire emergency, it read. No mention of Samuel. No hint of another boy involved. Elden stared at the photo for a long time, feeling the shape of the truth like a bruise rising under skin. It wasn't just that Roy had lied. It was that he'd rewritten the entire page, and everyone had believed him. He asked the librarian quietly, "Is he still around?" Candler. She looked up this time, peering at him with eyes that had known too many truths. "Roy," she said. "Sure. Lives over in Leakey now. Runs the county commission, if you can believe it. Big family man. Donates to the church, sponsors the firehouse barbecue every spring. Been in the local paper more than the mayor." She smiled, unaware of the chill running through Elden's bones. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," he murmured, folding the paper shut. "Just thought the name sounded familiar." Outside, the wind had picked up, sending dust skittering across the sidewalks and rattling the cafe's windows. He crossed the street and stepped inside the diner, empty save for a few men hunched over coffee and a waitress who looked like she'd been there since the highway was 2 lanes. He took a seat at the counter, ordered nothing, and asked the waitress, "You ever know a boy named Samuel Harper?" She frowned thoughtfully. Harper. Long time ago. That the one went missing up near the preserve? Real sweet kid. Quiet. I remember his mother used to come in here every Tuesday for cornbread. Never touched the meatloaf, though. A beat. You his kin. Brother, Elden said softly. The woman's face softened. Lord, I'm sorry. Folks talked for a while, but nothing ever came of it. Sheriff said there weren't no signs of foul play, but she leaned in, lowered her voice. I always thought it smelled fishy. Especially since Roy Candler was involved. Elden's breath caught. You knew. She nodded, eyes flicking toward the window, where wind danced in whirlpools down the street. Never could prove anything. But that boy Roy, he had a mean edge. Folks forget that now. All they see is the man who donates to Little League and wears a flag pin on his collar. But I remember. He wasn't right. Had a way of talking that made you feel small. And that smile, that grin, like he knew he'd always get away with it. She paused, searching his face. You know something, don't you? Elden didn't speak. He only reached into his pack and pulled out the photo of the three boys, Samuel in the middle, Roy off to the side, staring into the lens like it owed him something. He laid it gently on the counter. The waitress covered her mouth. She whispered. That's him. That's Samuel. And that other boy. I never saw him before. Elden nodded. Neither did I. For a long while, they said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, deep and slow. When he stood to leave, she reached out and touched his wrist. You do what you came to do, she said softly. But be careful. Men like Roy, they get used to being believed. He stepped back into the wind and walked slowly to the truck, where Gracie waited, eyes calm and steady. He sat beside her and looked out across the empty street, the photo still in his hand. The last piece was coming into view. Roy had built his whole life on a lie. And tomorrow, Elden would drive to Leaky to the house on the hill, with its flags and fences and plaques. He wouldn't shout. He wouldn't accuse. He would knock on the door and ask a single question, and if the man inside flinched even slightly, Elden would know. Because some truths don't need proving. They just need witnessing. The road to Leaky cut through low ridges and dry creek beds, winding between patches of mesquite and old stone fences that had lost their purpose. The sky above was heavy with the weight of coming rain, gray with streaks of bruised blue, like someone had taken a wet brush to the edge of the heavens. Elden drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the old tin box beside him. Gracie sat alert in the passenger seat, her body still but her eyes always moving, as if she, too, understood the shape of what waited ahead. He found the house easily enough. It sat just off the main road, past the elementary school and the post office, a broad one-story ranch-style place with a wide front porch, an American flag on a steel pole, and a white sign above the mailbox that read, The Candler Family, EST 1982. Fresh paint. Clean windows. A swing beneath the live oak out front that creaked gently in the wind. Elden parked under a pecan tree across the street and sat for a while, watching the house, watching the rhythm of it. A woman came out to shake crumbs from a tablecloth. A boy on a bike passed, waved at her. Normal things. Daily things. But the man himself didn't appear. He waited until nearly 4 o'clock, when the sky finally split and rain began to fall, not hard, not angry, just steady, as if the world itself were releasing something. Then the front door opened. Roy Candler stepped out, older now, but unmistakable, tall, broad across the chest, silver at the temples, dressed in pressed jeans and a collared shirt. He moved like someone who believed the ground would always meet his feet where he expected it. He paused on the porch, looking up at the rain, hands on his hips like he owned the weather. Elden crossed the road. The rain softened as he walked, soaking his shoulders, blurring the edges of the photo in his shirt pocket. Gracie stayed by his side, silent. When he reached the steps, Roy turned. Yes. Elden met his gaze. You're Roy Candler. The man nodded slowly. That's right. Can I help you? Elden took a breath, heavy with years. You knew my brother. Samuel Harper. Fall of 1968. Roy didn't flinch, didn't blink. But something passed through his eyes, fast, sharp, then buried. Can't say I do, he said. Name doesn't ring a bell. Elden nodded once. He went missing. They said he ran away. But he didn't. And you know that. Roy's jaw worked slightly, just once. Look, I don't know what this is about, but Elden pulled the photo from his pocket and handed it over. The rain had warped its edges, but the faces were still clear. Samuel. Roy. The third boy. The arch in the background. Roy stared at it. And this time, he did flinch. Just slightly. But it was there. He looked up, the mask slipping for a second. I was 15, he said quietly. It got out of hand. We were just playing around. You understand that, right? No, Elden said. I don't. Roy's hands tightened around the photo. He said he was going to tell. About the fire. About what we did. He didn't understand what it would do to my father, to my family. He was going to ruin everything. He was trying to tell the truth, Elden said. Silence. Just rain and breath. Then Roy whispered, he's not dead. Elden went still. Roy looked away. I told everyone he ran. Let them believe he died. But he didn't. I helped him disappear. We sent him north to Oklahoma, then to Colorado. He didn't want to come back. Said he didn't trust anyone. Said the land only listens to people who listen back. Where is he now? Elden asked, voice low, cracking. Roy shook his head. I don't know. Last I heard was in '86. A letter from somewhere in Oregon. He used a different name. Said he was working with wildlife in a forest. Said not to look. Elden stared at him, every part of him aching. You had 50 years, he said. And you never told anyone? Roy looked tired then, not guilty, not afraid. Just hollow. It was easier to be the hero. Elden stepped back from the porch. You're not. He turned and walked away, the rain now running steady over the brim of his hat, down the lines of his coat. Behind him, the porch light flicked on. But he didn't look back. That night, Elden stayed at a roadside motel just outside town, a place with thin walls, humming AC, and a worn bedspread that smelled of old soap and pine cleaner. He sat by the window, watching Gracie sleep, the tin box on the table beside him. In the quiet, he thought of Samuel, not the boy he'd lost, but the man he'd never met. A man who had slipped through time like wine through leaves. Not dead. Not broken. Just gone. He took out the film and the note and placed them gently into a new envelope. Then he addressed it to a P.O. box he remembered from Samuel's last letter, found in their mother's old trunk long ago, from a return address that had never been answered. A long shot. But maybe the land was still listening. And in the morning, Elden would drive back toward Lost Maples. Not to find something, but to return what had been waiting. Because sometimes, stories don't end where you think they do. They bend, they circle, they vanish into silence, and then, years later, they come back as something softer. Something that forgives. Even if it never forgets.